and welcome to Salar. I'm Dardana Simran, and today we're discussing about the Aryan Khan case. On October 3rd, Aryan Khan was formally placed under arrest with his two other friends, Arbaz Seth Merchant and Munmun Dhamecha. The NCB recovered 6 grams of charas from Arbaz, but no drugs were found on Aryan. Having said that, the main question of why the bail has been denied, and most importantly, the timing of this particular case makes it a discussion worth having. Joining me today are two senior advocates of the Supreme Court. Mr. Brijesh Kalapa is a senior advocate in the Supreme Court and was also the legal advisor to the Karnataka government. He has individually represented governments, eminent individuals, and major industrial houses. Mr. K.V. Dhananjay's legal practice extends to both Supreme Court and High Courts of Karnataka, Madras, Delhi, and Mumbai. His area of practice involves constitutional law, administrative law, wires of tax legalization, arbitration, and commercial disputes. Thank you, sir, for joining. Let's discuss. So my first question to both of you is, according to the arrest memo, Aryan Khan was placed under the arrest for involvement in consumption, sale, and purchase of contraband. But until now, there are no statements of any recovery from him that have been made. So what are your comments on that? We can start with you, Mr. Brijesh.
Yeah, see, I think insofar as the arrest is concerned, I think the arrest is a prerogative of the investigating officer. And if the investigating officer finds material on the basis of which he can arrest, I think the discretion of the investigating officer in any case cannot kind of be questioned unless there are malafide or he's working on parameters which are outside the law. Otherwise, the investigating officer is generally deemed by the court to be acting within the terms of his powers, and therefore, usually the factum of arrest is not questioned. And generally, the court, even at the stage of bail, because ultimately in final trial, one may have it may have been a case of malicious prosecution, or it may have been a case of having a personal interest, having an axe to grind, and so on and so forth. But that will be at the final stage of the trial, and then there will have to be a counter case and so on and so forth. But insofar as the arrest is concerned, I don't think any court at this stage, at the very preliminary stage, will question the reasons for the arrest and say that no, arrest itself was not to have been done. I think that will eventually come if it does. But as on today, I think the court is the stage of questioning the arrest has not reached, and I don't think anybody is actually questioning the arrest, despite the fact that it's also a fact that one, he was not in possession of drugs. Two, that there was no drugs found either in his urine stream or in his blood stream, and the boy is young, and the fact that he has no antecedents of crime is also something which even the NCB concedes. So as far as these three factors are concerned, I think they are given, but the factum of arrest is true, and we'll have to accept it as it is.
Right. So you said, the NCP has agreed to the fact that there has been no drugs on him, right? But they have also suggested that Aryan is involved in, and I quote, international drug trafficking. But this is with WhatsApp being their source of evidence. So can a private chat with, let's say, a statement of let's have a blast be an indication to an international drug racket? And can it also be used as evidence in court?
Like I said, at the prima facie stage, it can. But and if the prosecution were to convince the judge who is going to decide the bail that there is enough reason to believe that there was some kind of a racket which was going on, and Mr. Aryan Khan was also part of that racket, I think the court is may have been inclined to pass such an order. But the point is that I think after a long period in custody, whether police or judicial custody, I think the magistrate should have been better informed as to what exactly the so-called racket is and so-called drug peddling, thing is. So I think if the judge were not convinced, and usually what happens is that if it's a high-profile case, it's my personal experience that courts lower down, they are always a little hesitant to pass orders of bail because there would be allegations one way or another. Therefore, they usually leave it to the wisdom of the higher courts to decide these issues.
Okay, so since you mentioned that they are slower in taking their decision when it comes to a high-profile case, Mr. Dhananjay, I want to ask you this question. Over the past year, we've seen with high-profile cases that the chances of even a media trial are higher, right? So why are other cases which should be highlighted not given that much importance as much of like a high-profile case when it is concerned to the showbiz industry?
Well, before we come to that, first of all, your first question was whether the arrest was justified. And on that aspect, I completely disagree with the answer given by my great friend, my learned friend. I don't, NCB has bigger and better business to do. There is so much of opium that's going from India to the airports in Africa. The people who man the airports in Africa fall repeatedly sick because NCB, which is supposed to prevent flow of drugs out of India, just does not do its job properly. And look at what they're doing now. They're going after a 21-year-old boy for what, 12 grams of charas? I mean, this is beyond ridiculous.
Right.
This is not why the NCB was, created in the first place. I can tell you the Maharashtra or the Mumbai police might think it's not worth their time to prosecute a 21-year-old boy for possession or consumption. And, the law, the NDPS law, notwithstanding that it actually offers or, stipulates 20-year jail terms for traffickers and all that, deals with consumers very differently. And you can't have, throughout the Aryan Khan episode, we've seen TV channels talk about something like conspiracy for consumption. And, in law, we don't have anything like a conspiracy for consumption. If you consume, you simply consume. There is no conspiracy for consumption. And this is, it's just not acceptable at all. There is no doubt NCB has the power to arrest in deserving cases. But then the fact that they have the power does not explain, it's not enough by itself to justify an arrest. You must offer a justification for arrest. And you can't say, we've arrested him because the law empowers us to arrest someone. No, that's not enough. You have to offer a justification. And I don't think they've offered a good enough justification. And I've gone through the orders passed by the Sessions Court. Of course, the order passed by the magistrate is not an order on the merit. And I don't agree, or rather, with due respects to the Sessions Court, I don't really see much of strong legal argument having incorporated into the judgment. The court says there is voluntary confession. Who is to say confession is voluntary? At the end of the day, the judges who deal with these cases day in and day out from the rich experience would know that, whatever the case of the NCB is, which is at inception during the course of trial, it almost always unravels itself. Witnesses turn hostile and something is not quite in order. So judges are not sitting in 1990s today. They are in 2021. They've had decades of experience dealing with NDPS cases. So they're not going to take the version of the NCB at face value. So they ought to have enlarged this boy on bail, and it does no good to anybody to keep a 21-year-old boy in jail simply because he was vicariously in possession. I mean, look, he was not even in direct possession. Someone else was in possession. And if the court takes note of the fact that the punishment for consumption is 6 months in case of certain class of drugs like charas, and then 1 year in case of other class of drugs like opium and all that, and that 1 year is not so much to be spent in jail, but the law expects that people will in fact be sent over for rehab. There is provision under the NDPS law itself that prosecution will be suspended under Section 21 if the person concerned undergoes a rehab. So what kind of a message is the court sending out here? People, look at the Ministry of Social Justice, the central government having come out with data that up to 8 crore persons in India are in fact, users of cannabis, and 30% of them are in fact addicted. So we see consumers very differently. We're not going to deal with them harshly, and it's very not unfortunate, it's disturbing that the courts in this case have dealt with Mr. Aryan Khan in a very disturbing manner. And this is not to happen. It's a 21-year-old, 22-year-old boy. It does not matter who his parents are. He's another citizen of India. He's entitled to the due process of law. And I don't think the law has been fair to him. The law has been very harsh to him. And that's what I would like to point out.
So you said the law has been harsh in this sense, and I'd like to also point out, because it's a high-profile case, coming to my latest question, the media trial, of course, becomes more, I would say harsher, right? Because this is a public personality and from an industry which is well known, and over the 1 year, we've seen so many cases come out with this. So why do you think, other cases, like let's say, for example, the Adani port case or the Sri Lankan vessel case, which could have been highlighted more, is not equally spoken about, or for that matter, wasn't even highlighted as much as this particular case was?
Well, media trials happen, and at some level, they're unavoidable. No matter whatever laws that we come out with to prevent media trials, media trial in some form or the other happens. And at some level, it might have a social value also. In general, I'm talking. The way the media trial went about so far as Aryan Khan is concerned, I think it's a bit shameful, because the people who talk about drug being a menace or so just don't understand that many of these drugs in so many other jurisdictions are being liberalized. Like, for instance, Portugal, from 2001, they've decriminalized consumption of all drugs, right? But then it's not as if the country has, is broken down into chaos or anything of that nature. So when our anchors, basically with very poor understanding of our own drug situation, like for instance, in this country, we follow a system of regulation that no other country in the world follows. That's because of historical reasons. That's because of religious reasons. You take a cannabis plant, we criminalize the flowers, but then we don't criminalize the seeds. Bang. There are certain states in North India where it is in fact, administered during festivals and so on and so forth. And when it comes to the flowers or charas itself, if someone really wants to express outrage at mere use of these drugs, then they must also take note of the reality, which is you take the sadhu, and the sadhus consume charas. And I invite all of these TV anchors to say something against it, because they might not want to. And that, in fact, is selective outrage. And that's what we have a problem with. If you don't understand the factual situation, then you have no business to, in fact, express selective outrage in this regard at all. You should get better educated. The reality here is that it's a very complicated issue, and for anchors to take an overly simplistic position and then to start, calling people who consume it as evil, no. People who consume it require help, and you're never going to help them by villainizing them. And that's not the intent of the law itself, because the law itself has been liberalized. Imagine this. If somebody must consume cannabis, he ought to get in touch with some dealer, and then for NCB to say that this man was in touch with this other dealer simply does not make any sense. How would you consume cannabis unless and until you're in touch with someone? And when NCB says that we need this man for interrogation, what are they expecting? Are they expecting Mr. Aryan Khan to basically, as part of investigation, reveal, about self-incriminating himself? Look at what the Constitution of India says. The Constitution of India says that you have a right to not incriminate yourself, which means our investigating agencies are not expected to ask people to incriminate themselves. They say to the court that we are waiting for this man to give us information about who his suppliers are. That's not done. You go over to any serious prosecuting agency, and then they never make such arguments in courts, because the courts are expected to ask them, are you expecting Mr. Aryan Khan to incriminate himself? Because if you want him to turn over information about a supplier, that's only possible after he incriminates himself. And why would he want to incriminate himself? You do your investigation, because the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 12, gives extensive powers. Simply because we don't want accused to incriminate themselves, we are going to conduct an investigation, not by asking somebody to incriminate themselves, to admit to wrongdoing. We have the power to chase. We have the power to break open doors. We have the power to seize records. We have the power to summon witnesses. We have these vast powers under Chapter 12 of the Criminal Procedure Code, precisely because we don't want our accused to incriminate themselves. Because I can tell you this, if you wear out a witness, accused, if you wear out an accused by depriving him of food and sleep and all that, he will confess to anything. He will probably even confess to having murdered Mahatma Gandhi. Look at what system we are going through. And this is the outrage I think the public must express. We have a problem with our drug laws. We need some of these laws to be reformed, but notwithstanding call for reform, our drug laws are being abused, and this is not the manner to do it. Aryan Khan needs help. If he did in fact consume, or if he plans to consume, he needs help. He does not deserve to be in jail. And he must not be expected to incriminate. And if our judicial system is expecting to let him out on bail only after he incriminates himself and gives the names of whoever supplied him the drug, I can tell you the judicial system is no different than the one we find in oppressive regimes like Russia or North Korea. Our judicial system is enlightened. It's not this bad.
And I just wanted to get at that because, like you mentioned, not just in this Aryan Khan case, take for example, anyone, when you hear of a drug case in India, it's more of the, the question of morality rises as much as, like you said, the idea of sending someone to rehab isn't the first thing that you speak about. You're mostly villainized. So we have addressed this, and I think this happens because of the societal norms of what we've been living in India is like. But I want Mr. Brijesh to also elaborate a little more on this, about what your thoughts are in terms of why does the question of morality rise when drugs come in, and why don't we speak about sending the person for help or rehab?
So the question of sending Aryan Khan to rehab doesn't arise for this reason that drugs were not found in his possession.
No, not Aryan Khan. In general.
No, let me come about Aryan Khan first. One, drugs were not found in his possession. Two, there were no drugs. In fact, there was no test done, even on his blood or his urine, to find out if the drugs were administered to him. He has not confessed to being a drug user, right?
Yeah.
So there is a question of sending him to rehab. Now the NCB seems to be making a case that he's part of an international racket to sell drugs, which is highly unlikely considering whose son he is, because he can't be the son of Shah Rukh Khan, who has probably 1,000 crore, and he's involved in this drug racket, so-called drug racket. So it's highly unlikely that the prosecution story is correct. It's highly unlikely. But the point is this, that today the prosecution has pitched so high and said that Aryan Khan is part of an international drug racket, right? So international drug racket means what? One, you don't have drugs. Two, merely because there is something on your WhatsApp which says, let's have a blast, right? So does it automatically take you to being part and parcel of an international drug racket? Obviously no, but it requires the judge to apply his mind and say that, look, there are lakhs and lakhs of drug users, like rightly pointed out by my learned colleague, that one, drug use is very rampant in India. Not just sadhu sannyasis, even one of our deity, one of the top deities of India, consumes drugs, in the sense that he found usually smoking cannabis, right? So I don't want to, this should not be a kind of a political point or anything, but it's true that, the drug use is rampant and it's often considered to be therapeutic. For instance, in places where, people have certain disease, then it's also said that please use cannabis because it can be used for medicinal purposes. So cannabis always doesn't mean that you're, making you bad use of it, or that you're addicted to it, and so on and so on. It certainly has medical reasons to use it, and I don't think it's criminalized in that sense. For that reason, I agree with what Mr. Dhananjay said, that he, when he pointed out that there's a large number of users, this is the point. But the point is that you're criminalizing somebody who is so-called using drugs or so on and so forth. He's like, everybody knows he's 22 or 23 years old. And you're putting a very young 22, 23-year-old deep inside prison in judicial custody in the company of hardened criminals. So what does he come out as? First is that when you're conducting arrest, one has to think it over, think it 10 times, whether this person's arrest is necessary, whether his judicial custody is necessary. And after having put him there, right, now you're exposing him to hardened criminals. So what will he come out as? This is the question. And this should weigh on all of us as a society, that how have we treated this young man? Have we treated him rightly? Have we taken good care of him to ensure that he's not criminalized and he's not exposed to the criminal elements of society, that he turns out to be a role model citizen? Is this the way we treat somebody? And whoever it is, I'm just trying to tell you that the officer who has conducted the raid and done the arrest, right? If tomorrow this were found to be a malicious prosecution, right? The law should be so severe against that gentleman, right? That there should be generations of officers who think 500 times before stepping into such kind of a misadventure, which I suspect it is. I suspect very strongly that it is a misadventure. One. Two, I suspect that it is a misadventure which is trying to cover up for the 3,000 kilo of heroin which was found in Adani port. I suspect that the reason for this arrest was to cover up several of the government's misdoings. But this is in my job as a leader, as an opposition party leader, that I'm saying this. But I strongly suspect that these are the reasons. And if an officer has actually stepped into the misadventure, then he should be punished so severely that generations of bureaucrats and generations of officers should think 500 times before stepping into something similar.
Right, and I just wanted to point that out as soon as you said that this could lead to like a misadventure that is sort of like being seen here with the latest update of an affidavit being filed in just some hours back. And this could be a twist in the Aryan Khan case, right? Which mentions a certain number of amount which is to be paid to the officer. So now I want to get back to that by saying that you said initially WhatsApp chats can be used as evidence in court. So, but is this a strong enough evidence for him to be denied of bail up until now?
Let Mr. Dhananjay answer this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what affidavit you're talking about. I haven't watched the news today, so perhaps you could you could just elaborate.
So I want to just get at the first thing, which is let's have a blast. This is the statement which is being told to us, right? We don't have the WhatsApp chats per se, which just says that he has used
so much of luxury. I mean, does the NCB have so much of luxury in going after someone's dated or old WhatsApp chat that says let's have a blast? Don't they have their hands full already? Aren't they being blamed by so many different countries for allowing opiates to freely flow out of India? What is the NCB really doing about it? So that's a question I want to ask. That's because, look, the people might want 100 things from the police, but then the fact of the matter is the resources of the police are always limited, though they must go after the bigger ones and they must try to catch the bigger fish. Why are they going after Aryan Khan in the first place? I just don't understand. Now, if there is a WhatsApp chat that says, let's have a blast, then the maker of that is the best person to interpret what it means. Now, if Aryan Khan has something to, but does the NCB get the authority to ask him what this means? I don't think so. Aryan Khan has a right to remain silent. So it doesn't make any sense for the NCB to say Aryan Khan is not explaining what this means, because by making this kind of a noise, I think it simply makes itself a laughing stock. I think that's how it should be looked at. Now, what's the affidavit that you were talking about?
So there is an affidavit that has been filed in, which is just some hours back, which says that there was this officer that has taken, which was the selfie that got viral, the officer that had taken Aryan Khan into custody, and that person who turned out to have cases on himself. So there is a certain number of amount that needs to be paid to the NCB in charge, which is Sameer Bankade, and 8 crores has been mentioned, which he's just overheard.
And someone's put this on an affidavit?
Yeah, and someone has filed this as an affidavit.
Well, it works like this. If you want to lie and if you put your lie on an affidavit, then you're liable for prosecution. There's a punishment of up to 2 years in jail. So if somebody puts something on an affidavit, then that prima facie must be given some weight. Now, if a witness whose statement must have been responsible to incarcerate Aryan Khan, if that witness comes out and says that someone sort of bribe here and absent that bribe, Aryan Khan was put behind bars, then that's a statement that must be taken with great seriousness.
Right. So
Unless and until
be a twist.
whatever allegation he has made is denied by the NCB, not just through a press statement. If
Right.
he's made an allegation that somebody demanded this amount of money, then the
Hmm.
person involved must in fact come out and rebut it specifically and say, I did not demand a bribe. If this witness
Wasn't
is
a demand. He just overheard two officers speaking about paying a particular amount. So now this is just, which has come out. So there's no, like, not much that is being spoken about yet.
well, if a witness is going to put himself out on an affidavit, then I
Right.
don't think anybody could say that I will believe this witness when he signed the punch about seizure, but I will not believe him now when he
Yeah.
makes an allegation of bribe being demanded. So it doesn't work that way. If you would believe the first statement, you must also believe the second statement. At least the second statement is made on an affidavit. It's more worthy of belief than the first one, which is not
Okay.
supported by an affidavit. So this twist, I think, this
Yeah.
twist is extremely serious,
Mhm.
and I don't think it must be laughed off. It's an extremely serious matter.
Right. So, and I want to just get at this, where the prosecution in this case has also said that he has been involved in conspiracy, right? Without so the amount of drugs which, let's say, weren't recovered from him is immaterial. So let's say without the proof of a recovery from Mr. Aryan Khan, if this could still be a strong enough reason for the denial of his bail. So what is conscious consumption? Could you shed some light on that?
Well, the court has made a distinction between two things, because the lawyers for Aryan Khan did say that Aryan Khan, there was no recovery made from Aryan Khan personally. How do you make a recovery? You search a person's body, or you search the person's belongings. And as far as Mr. Aryan Khan is concerned, they did search his body, and then they did search his belongings, and they were not able to make any recovery. But
Right.
then the court goes on to say that Aryan Khan confessed to being aware of his friend carrying some amount of drugs, and that was for mutual consumption. Now, this apparently is a statement, according to the court, voluntarily made by Aryan Khan. But what I'm surprised about is, how does a court get to say something is voluntary? I mean, why does the court choose to believe the prosecution rather than the version of the accused? I'm sure the accused lawyers, they must be very resourceful. They must be some of the top lawyers in Maharashtra. I'm sure they would have said that if there is such a confession, it's a coerced one. So all that the court would have at that point of time is, well, the NCB making its own statement and claim, and then the accused making his own statement and claim. The fact of the matter is, if you don't recover something from a person, then you have no business to incarcerate him, because the charge here is what? That he would consume, or he did consume. Well, the law relating to consumption is very liberalized. That's been the case for the last decade or so. So how do you club that with trafficking? Now, if we don't recognize this distinction under the NDPS law, traffickers are dealt with very harshly, whereas consumers are not so dealt with. And by the way, there are 8 crore consumers of cannabis. And if Aryan Khan tomorrow is proven to have consumed cannabis, he becomes one more addition to that 8 crore. And I can tell you what, if I'm not going to be shocked at that 8 crore persons consuming cannabis, I have no moral right to express outrage at one more addition to that. Number one. Number two, as a lawyer who's practiced on the side of tobacco control, I can tell you that when we don't understand what tobacco does, but when we are all for this media-induced outrage, it would be ridiculous, because what does tobacco do? Every 2 minutes, 5 persons are dead in this country because of tobacco consumption. According to the World Health Data Fact Sheet of 2018 February, 15 lakh persons in India die each year from tobacco use, 15 lakh. And you can actually add up all the substances and drugs under the NDPS law. I don't think it's even 5%. It's even 5. I'm sorry, it's not even 5%. It's 2% at the most, or 3% at the most. We lose more people to tobacco. But why is tobacco all right? Well, possibly because tobacco, people who grow tobacco, people who deal with tobacco, they happen to make great donations to our political parties. There is a larger picture that we always forget. We lose too many people to tobacco. The addictive potential of tobacco is so many times more than cannabis, opium, alcohol, and so many other drugs and substances. So, well, you see, we forget about tobacco. We talk about cannabis. We think, oh, God, this is a great villain. But why don't we also talk about tobacco?
Right. And like you mentioned, right. No, you were saying?
Well, all I'm saying is if we don't cultivate a perspective, and if we are deriving our information and outrage from what the mainstream media in India is talking about, we are severely misled.
And on that note, I'd actually just take a minute to get back to you on this, sir. But if we just take the numbers, 3,000 kgs of heroin versus 6 grams of charas. Let's just look at that and see how much of outrage is done on one particular case versus another. So, like Mr. Kalapa rightly pointed out, that there could be a larger reason of why one was not spoken about that much versus another one being spoken about. So I'd like you to elaborate a little more on that, sir, and just tell us why do you think that, let's just look at the numbers. Let's not get into the other details, and tell us, like, 6 grams of charas versus 3,000 kilos of heroin, which is almost to, valued at rupees 21,000 crore. So, and that can have a huge drastic effect on our economy as well, right? So can you elaborate a little more on that?
See, one is the fact that there was nearly 3 billion worth of heroin which was found. And the second is that earlier also, just a few months earlier, 6 months earlier, a huge consignment has again been seized, and from exactly the same premises, right? So this is, I think we don't know much of the details in regard to this, but from 2014, it's my experience as not just a lawyer, but as a TV panelist, that when you attend X channel, then X channel has a certain view on certain, certain developments, and they present a particular perspective. Now let's move to Y channel. Y channel has a different perspective, and they proceed along certain lines. Now, I think Indian viewers have increasingly been able to find that if you're going to mark X channel, Y channel, and Z channel, you know exactly what their line of thinking is, right? So, and these are clearly marked for all of us. I think each one of us as viewers knows clearly which channel to watch for what kind of news and what will the slant be. I think we all know that today. Now, when we are watching channels which run the government line, right? They took a particular stand when Riya Chakraborty was involved, right? So then they were very angry with the fact that the drugs were a huge menace, right? Now they're again angry that Aryan Khan is inside and he's incarcerated and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the question that there has been such a huge consignment of very dangerous heroin, which could have a link to Afghanistan, right? And then that could also fuel terrorism. It could also create drugs dependence in a huge population. And then the fact that we already have a huge amount of unemployment. But we find that these channels are deafeningly silent about these facts. Now, what do you say? Then obviously you say that this is the government view, because they have been running the government view all along. And then when you see that they are silent on this huge consignment which has been seized at the Adani port, then you automatically come to the conclusion that the government view is to keep silent on that, but to shout about Riya Chakraborty and about Aryan Khan, right? So then automatically you say that, look, the larger premise seems to be that you have to kind of make these two look like villains, and look at the fact that such a huge consignment was realized as one of those really harmless things which doesn't affect anybody.
Right. And just getting back at the number again to mention, the 6 grams of charas which was recovered from, Mr. Aryan Khan's friend is not usually the amount which is considered for commercial use, right? So if this, let's say the seizure was made otherwise, not pertaining to this particular case, would the court's decision have differed? And would the particular individual, Mr. Arbaz, have gotten bail?
See, personally, I think that if it were an ordinary circumstance, right? If a particular regime were not in power, and if the certain courts didn't behave a certain way, if two chief justices back to back, one did not become a governor of a state, another chief justice of India did not become a Rajya Sabha MP, and a certain judge was killed, and the court behaved a certain way, If all these things hadn't occurred, I certainly believe that this was a case for bail, and I have no hesitation in saying that there is no question of locking up these two individuals for such a huge amount of time, right? Of course, one may find that these comments are, slightly, I think, more than I would generally speak. But I think, given the facts of the case and the larger scenario that we are actually witnessing, I have no hesitation in saying that.
And I just want to, since you made this point, I want to get, and we've spoken at large on this topic by now, I want to get to asking both of you this question. Do you believe that Khan's surname or him being a part of the showbiz industry is making him, a target of interest?
If Mr. Khan was a slum dweller and if he was not, if he did not carry that surname, he would have been, I think the police would have asked him to plead guilty to the magistrate, and the magistrate would have convicted him with a fine of 100 or 250 rupees. And that's what happens. In hundreds or thousands of cases. People are convicted in Mumbai, right? The police catch over someone, they take him over to, they take over the accused to the magistrate, and they tell the accused that, look, all that you will get here is a conviction, and you have to pay 100 or 200 rupees. And they, in fact, happen to spend in court for about 4 or 5 hours for that time. I mean, the Center for Legal Policy has come out with a beautiful study on what happens to all the marginalized and slum dwellers, accused in NDPS cases. So they've studied a certain period, and within that period, they found out that so many people were convicted for consumption, and conviction in almost all cases ran to a scale of 100, 200, or up to 500 rupees. And that's it. Their life is back. And that, again, for what? For the 12 grams of charas or 25 or 50 or 60 grams of charas, this is what people would have faced. But Aryan Khan is enduring what he's enduring for reasons I just don't understand. And, if a port operator was caught with a haul of that kind anywhere, in North America or in Europe, I can tell you this, the port operator would have been criminally investigated. And until he would have been cleared of wrongdoing, he is, licensed to operate the port would have been suspended, and the government would have taken over the operation of the port. That is the kind of seriousness other countries would have demonstrated. And here we don't see even that kind of seriousness being imposed on this port operator. And as far as the media is concerned, by the way, honestly, for your information, I don't expect much of the mainstream media in India, or I don't hold them to a very higher standard, because why would you want to hold them to such a high standard when you see them day in and day out act almost like propaganda channels? So I don't have much of an expectation. So I'm not truly disappointed, because disappointment comes only if you really hold people to a certain standard or you have a certain expectation. Now, I lost track of the actual question you were asking. So,
no. Yeah. So this, I just wanted to get at, is it because, let's see, just his surname?
Aryan Khan, yes, Aryan Khan is being harassed simply because he is the son of a very big Bollywood star. And if he wasn't that, look, there are thousands of Mumbai slum dwellers who've already been convicted and who have had to pay 100 or 300 rupees and then spend 4 hours in the court premises and then walk back home. That's happened. So whatever is happening to Aryan Khan, I think can only be understood from that sense. So why is NCB keen to get a spectacle out of this? Is it to distract people of this country from more worthwhile issues? Because if a government of the day, in a general sense, if the government of the day were to manipulate the media to such an extent that they would prevent worthwhile issues from being exposed or debated, what would happen? What would happen is those worthwhile issues, people involved in those worthwhile issues will feel that they're not there in the debate. They're not there in the news because they're not violent enough. They are not forceful enough, and they will turn to violence. And that's what we've seen around the world. When there are genuine mass movements and when the media is manipulated by the government of the day to such an extent to not cover those genuine mass movements, then people involved in those genuine mass movements will think, oh, wait, I think our path to attracting greater attention from the government is to now escalate this. There is more violence, and I'm scared that we might be heading in that path. If we don't give appropriate media coverage to deserving issues, then those issues simply escalate, and nobody wants to see an escalation and then more violence in that area, because there is always a price to pay when media is manipulated. When the mainstream media is manipulated, there is always a price to pay, and that price is always bitter for the country.
And that is super unfortunate, right? Like, let's say when the mainstream media, as you mentioned, is sort of not focusing on the topics that need to be highlighted as much as these issues that can just be dealt with at an easier pace, which we don't see. So little details of this case have been coming out in the public eye or in social media as compared to the cases that we previously spoke about, whether it's the Adani port or the Sri Lankan vessel, which it has a larger scale, which can actually lead to so many things, as Mr. Kalapa mentioned. So I want to get back to you, sir, and you can just tell us a little more about what you think, is this the particular reason for making him the target of interest? And then we move on to your kind of question. Mr. Kalapa, that was for you.
Oh, sorry. Can you come again? I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I said, I was repeating the question which I just asked Mr. Dhananjay, which was his surname being a part of him being a part of the showbiz industry over time, which we've seen, and the cases that we spoke about, which weren't highlighted by the mainstream media as much as this was. So does this make him a target of interest?
No, I have no hesitation in saying that ever since there has been a particular regime which has been elected in this country in 2014, the law of equality has been put in the cold storage, and people who have a certain surname, right? People who belong to a certain community, they are being stigmatized, they are being given assigned roles, and that is being done increasingly. Now, the impression largely to be given or to be spread in society by this particular regime appears to be that people of a particular community, they have a proclivity to be involved in criminal activities, and this is something which is a message which they like to send to society at large. If you ask me the truth of the matter, I don't agree with that view. One, for this simple reason that if you go to any jail, you will find people of all communities there, and they're all supposed to be criminals, right? So you don't find people only from a particular community. And this is the first step, just like the Jews in Germany were first said that the Jews were either dirty or unreliable, right? And then that, it's better to stigmatize them. I think a similar thing is being done in India. I have absolutely no hesitation in saying so.
So can this case be taken, as an example to be given out to the larger public that if this can happen to this particular individual, then, just be aware? Is that what this case could turn out to be like?
No, I don't see. I don't think this can be a larger example and so on and so forth. I think examples are dime a dozen. And for a seasoned lawyer like me to come to a conclusion that if you have a particular surname, or if you belong to X, Y, or Z community, then you are likely to be targeted, other than if you belong to A, B, or C community, right? So I think it's very clear that the regime will go after you and will be harsher to you than if you belong to A, B, or C community. I think there's absolutely no doubt in my mind about this fact today in India.
Got it. And so the hearing is tomorrow. The next hearing is on 26th October. And looking at the current calendar and most courts being shut because of the festive season, do you think it would affect the case, and would it prolong it more if the final decision isn't taken on the 26th of October?
I think, first is that tomorrow is it's before the High Court. And I think there will be a ray of hope before the High Court, because it is a higher court, as I just told you already. And I feel that eventually matters like this, they receive some kind of resolution from a higher court, and the courts below are usually very hesitant to pass orders in this matter. I don't know if my learned colleague, Mr. Dhananjay, would agree with me.
Well, High Court, what the Sessions Court did in this case was to rely on the judgment of the High Court. Now, the High Court had passed a judgment in the Riya Chakraborty case by laying out a certain proposition, which in fact was greatly relied upon by the Sessions Court. Now, that aspect, I'm very sure, will be exploited by the NCB. And, it's very unfortunate that over the last 1 year, the Bombay High Court a lot of people were expecting the Bombay High Court to take a more liberal view of some of the harsh provisions of the NDPS law, but that did not happen. So I'm not very sure one should hold out so much of hope at the Bombay High Court for a swift resolution of this case. It's possible that it may take quite some time. But as far as the larger, broader public interest is concerned, again, let's talk practical issues, which is I've been saying that this is very harsh for Aryan Khan. But having said that, I'm very sure Aryan Khan, the jail system is such that Aryan Khan will be provided with various things to read during his incarceration and so on and so forth. And I'm very sure he can bear some more time in jail. It's not so much about him. It's about what's happening to the system. We're not talking about what's actually happening to Aryan Khan himself, because in the jail, it's possible he might be comfortable somehow, or he might be made comfortable. And I think he could go on in jail for some more time. It's not about him. Why do we really care about any one individual in this country? It's not about him. It's what's happening to the system, because Aryan Khan reflects poorly on NCB. It reflects poorly on our judicial system. And that's bad for the country. It's not Aryan Khan that's important. It's and also the fact that if Aryan Khan was not Aryan Khan, if he was not son of Shah Rukh Khan, then I don't think we would even be debating this, because the court would have said, what's the big deal here? Let's send him out on do in a very swift manner. I think there's quite some time. And now it looks like the NCB, going by what we just learned, that is allegations having been made against the NCB will be even more aggressive to make sure that he is retained in custody, because NCB again has an image to keep. So I'm very sure NCB will be able to pull out more things and as part of this or that WhatsApp chat, because now it's a case of conspiracy. And in a case of conspiracy, you will always bring the worst things about what some other perpetrator has done and attribute that to everybody involved in the alleged conspiracy. So NCB will fight this out. So I think it will be some more time. And this is bad. If our judiciary is not able to quickly respond to cases of abuse by the prosecutor, that's bad. Because if you literally look into what the NDPS law says, Section 37 talks about bail, a person being entitled to bail only if the court is of the reasonable belief that the person is not guilty of the offense, and during the period of bail, he would not commit the offense. Now, this is on a literal reading, you might actually, come to a certain view. But if you consider the fact that this is not 1985 and that this is 2021, that a judge who would have looked into 37 and applied it in a certain way also happens to preside in a trial, and then realizes that, look, in the trial, everything actually falls apart. So that judge, after his rich judicial experience, is not expected to read it literally. He's expected to read it in a very different way. And that reading we don't see coming from the magistrate court, or for that matter, the sessions court, or not even for that matter from the High Court of Bombay. So I'm not holding out a great deal of hope here, but I just spoke about a person being comfortable in jail because there's also that other aspect. Yeah. If you're a VIP and then if you can afford to do this or that, then your life is made a bit more comfortable. So, that's a bad solace to take from, but I thought in the interest of completeness, I must also talk about that.
Correct. And I want to wrap this up with, how in our country, there's hardly been a case where the agencies have nabbed the sources of several drug consignments. It's always either the consumers or the peddlers who are caught, right? So why do you think we can't reach to the source of where this is starting from, or where it has started from?
No serious prosecutor in the world would start with the consumer to go after the trafficker. Nobody does that except the NCB. I don't think any state police force is so unprofessional to adopt such an approach. That is juvenile. You can't go after the big fish by catching hold of a consumer, because the consumer is almost always kept in the dark about who's at the top. The consumer deals with some middleman, one level or two levels above him. And then there is a smoke screen. And so those people, those middlemen themselves wouldn't know who's really calling the shots at the top. So it's only the NCB of India, which, by the way, must take a great deal of international blame for doing a very poor job of not, preventing outflow of so many of these opiates out of India. It is only they who believe that you catch hold of a consumer and you can go all the way up to the top. That's never happened before, and I don't think that's likely to happen in this case as well. And the problem here is this: our courts are not asking tough questions to the NCB. Our courts are unfortunately becoming very gullible. When NCB says that this is the case, we don't find them being questioned in a tough manner by the judges. And as our learned friend was pointing out, that the trial courts are somewhat reluctant to grant bails because these are matters of media attention and so on and so forth. The trial courts are the foundation of any criminal justice system. Now, if you must get your justice only from the Supreme Court of India, then you must not hesitate to say that the judicial system is largely broken. The Supreme Court of India has 32 judges. It is not possible for anybody to expect justice only from the Supreme Court, because if the justice system is such as to make think the other layers are almost broken and justice, if at all, can only come from the Supreme Court, then I can tell you this: it's not even worth calling it a justice system. If justice system cannot be dispensed with at the trial level, I don't think we must hold, we must be, very pleased with that kind of a system. We want our justice system to work at the trial level. And, imagine the Bombay High Court and the Supreme Court have so much more work. They ideally ought not to be dealing with the Aryan Khan case. The Aryan Khan case was fit for a magistrate and for no one else above him. Okay, for jurisdictional purposes, it went up to the Sessions Court. It deserves to stay there. It certainly is not a matter that must be debated at the Bombay High Court or for that matter at the Supreme Court. It's not worth their time. Now, why has it become worth their time? Because, well, you see, on the face of it, there is injustice. And of course, those who suffered injustice must appeal and move forward. That's it.
So I want Mr. Kalapa to add up a little bit to what Mr. Dhananjay has said in this. Like, why don't we reach the source, and why isn't the source nabbed when it comes to the several drug consignments in India, especially?
See, if the government of India, which sees the Taliban as something of a scourge, and the real scourge behind the several terror plots which are in India and which are troubling us in Kashmir and so on and so forth, I think the first and primary duty of the government of India should have been to find out the source of the 3,000 kilograms of heroin which has reached the Adani port. And obviously, the fact that they are not doing anything at all to actually reach the source, because this is I can't tell you how diabolical it is, insofar as the country is concerned, insofar as the youth are concerned, insofar as the security of the country is concerned, and insofar as the development of terrorism in this country is concerned. I don't think it's possible to overstress how important it is. But the fact that despite this, they're going after very small fish, like Aryan Khan tells you the whole story. That the idea is to kind of subterfuge, to hide behind people like Aryan Khan. And the biggest crimes, the biggest of biggest crimes, should then be brushed aside under the carpet with the help of a pliable, willing, and extremely corrupt media.
Right. So I think we answered all the questions that have been in people's mind as to why has his bail been denied? What are the different reasons behind holding these young adolescents in jail till now? And I think only with time, let's say on October 26th, we'll get more answers to this. So thank you for joining us, Mr. Brijesh and Mr. Dhananjay. That's all for today. With the next hearing scheduled for tomorrow, I hope we've answered all your questions on what you need to know about the Aryan Khan case. Stay tuned with Salar for all the latest updates.